Chapter 4.1, Philosophy's Existence. If every existence is derived from a transcendental evaluation of a term's self-identity, what about philosophy's existence? And what differentiates this existence 20 years ago, at the time of my first manifesto, from what can be said of it today, this second manifesto? In 1989, it was still no doubt the case that the transcendental on which philosophy was based remained marked by a general logic of suspicion, which set down the norm for all existence in the intellectual world. Let's say that from the 50s, 60s on, the degree of existence of inherited disciplines, particularly those including philosophy proposed by the university at the time, was well nigh declared nil in advance, since they were suspected of being nothing but inconsistent validations of the established order. Within the psychoanalytic lineage, Lacan had deciphered philosophical systematization as akin to paranoia. He prescribed philosophy's discourse as invariably split between the precarious arrogance of the master's position and the repetitive weakness of the university. He discredited the love of truth as an expression devoid of any sense other than a neurotic one. He accused metaphysics of serving only to fill up the hole of politics. The modern variants of Marxist revolutionary politics had, for their part, severely subordinated philosophy to politics, with Althusser himself of defining philosophy brought back to the almost timeless gestures of the conflict between materialism and idealism as the class struggle in theory. The analytical current was to attack philosophy, as Wittgenstein had already done with brio from the outset of the 20th century, as a set of meaningless propositions. It set out to show that thinking required, above all, a syntactic supervision of sentences on the model of formal logic, and a semantic surveillance referring to either the evidence of the senses or the exigencies of action. Empiricism on the one hand, pragmatism on the other. Finally, in a tortured interpretation of Nietzsche, Heidegger had declared the end of metaphysics with the technological completion of the forgetting of being, and the non-assured necessity of a return to the origin, which, in dialogue with the saying of the poets, would restore the figure of the thinker beyond all philosophy. The post-Second World War French interpretations of Heidegger compounded this verdict by aligning thinking not only with free existence and revolutionary praxis, Sartre, but also with great poetic or theatrical pronouncements, Beaufret, Char, then Lacoulabart, and a deconstructive labor within both language and the sensorial spread of experience, Derrida and Nancy. What is striking about all these configurations is the way in which they end up mobilizing against philosophy the entire range of types of truth: love, desire, and drives in the psychoanalytic tradition, politics in the case of the Marxist tradition, science in that of the analytic, and art in the Nietzschean. As such, the transcendental, in the name of which philosophy was affirmed to barely exist 30 to 40 years ago, may be described as evaluating existences directly on the level of processes of creation, or processes of truth, concluding from philosophy's status as neither a science, nor a politics, nor again an art or existential passion, that it was condemned to disappear, if it wasn't dead already. Revolution, passionate love, mathematical logic, and modern poetry, all multiplicities endowed with an exceptional, practically maximal intensity of existence in the 20th century, basically stood between the philosophical tradition and its continuation. Philosophy's self-identity having as such become temporally almost nil, it was then possible to mark its inexistence. My first manifesto rose up against this verdict by setting truths out as the conditions of philosophy, rejecting, under the name of suture, an intention to merge philosophy with one of its conditions, and making the category of truth, with its successive elaborations, as well as its practical fate, the very core of philosophical labor. Raised up from its inexistence through the transcendental separation of its conditions and returned to an operation of its own, philosophy could go on. To the problematic of its end, I proposed substituting the watchword, one more step, or that of Beckett's unnameable, you must go on. We can then describe what is, in a certain sense, the existential necessity of a second manifesto as follows. If philosophy's existence was declared minimal 20 years ago, and one could today maintain that it finds itself no less under threat, but for the diametrically opposed reason that it is now endowed with an excessive, artificial existence. Particularly in France, philosophy is everywhere. It serves as a trademark for various media pundits. It livens up cafes and health clubs. It has its magazines and its gurus. It is universally called upon by everything from banks to major state commissions to pronounce on ethics, law, and duty. The raison d'être of this turnabout is a change of transcendental, relating less to philosophy than to its social substitute, which is ethics. Since the new philosophers and the collapse of socialist states, only the most elementary form of moralizing preaching qualifies any longer as philosophy. All situations are assessed in terms of the moral conduct of their actors, with the number of deaths being the sole yardstick for political endeavors and the fight against the bad guys, the unique good possible to be put forward. In short, what's called philosophy is the sales pitch for what Bush named the fight against the axis of evil. That hodgepodge of socialist ruins and minuscule fascistic religious groups in the name of which our West conducts bloody campaigns and defends its indefensible democracy all over the map. It is only possible to exist as a philosopher, then, we might say, insofar as one uncritically adopts, in the name of democratic dogma, the refrain of human rights and our society's various customs in respect of women, types of punishment, or the protection of nature, the typically Yankee thesis of the West's moral superiority. This dramatic shift can be formalized as follows. If, 20 years ago, philosophy, forced into ruinous sutures with its conditions of truth, found itself asphyxiated by inexistence, philosophy today, chained to conservative morality, finds itself prostituted to a vacuous over-existence, whence it is no longer a matter of reaffirming its existence by operations seeking to desuture it from its conditions, but of setting out its essence as this is manifested in the world of appearing, so as to distinguish it from its moral counterfeits. Such counterfeits being, as I have already indicated, all the more virulent for their bolstering the expansion of crass positivism, neurosciences, cognitive science, etc., by providing its indispensable supplement of soul. It is a matter today, in sum, of demoralizing philosophy. This amounts to taking the risk of exposing it once again to the judgment of impostors and sophists, a judgment summed up, as a certain Socrates was to experience, in that gravest of accusations, you are corrupting youth. Only a short while ago, in the pages of a prestigious New York magazine, an American critic published an attack, the complete conceptual mediocrity of which could be allowed to pass, given its aim was exclusively one of moral redress. With regards to young students and misinformed teachers, this prosecutor stated, philosophers such as Slavoj Žižek or myself are nothing less than reckless. This is a standard theme intoned by the worst conservatives from antiquity right up until today. Young people run extremely grave risks if put in contact with bad masters who will divert them from all that is serious and honorable, namely a career, morality, the family, order, the West, property, law, democracy, and capitalism. To avoid such recklessness, the first step is to rigorously subordinate conceptual invention to what is obvious or natural in philosophy, as these people understand it. Namely, a soft morality, or what Lacan, in his abrupt way of speaking termed the service of goods. As regards the overabundance of existence threatening philosophy today with evaporation into both a conservative and aggressive figure, we will take up a transcendental evaluation of its existence that brings it back towards its essence. By definition, philosophy, when it truly appears, is either reckless or it is nothing. As the power of destabilizing dominant opinion, it summons youth to those points where the continuous creation of a new truth is decided. This is the reason why its manifesto deals today with the typically Platonic movement that conveys forms of appearing to the eternity of truths. This perilous process is one it embarks upon without reservation. In the world in which we find ourselves, philosophy can only appear as the inexistent peculiar to all morality and all law, insofar as morality and law remain, and can but remain, under the heel of the unbelievably inegalitarian violence inflicted upon the world by dominant societies, with their savage economy and states that are more than ever, to employ Marx's formula, the mere agents of capital. Or, put more precisely, philosophy appears in our world when it escapes the status of the inexistent of all morality and all law, when, reversing the verdict that delivers it up to the vacuity of philosophies that are as servile as they are ubiquitous, it acquires the maximal existence of that which illuminates the action of universal truths. This illumination transports philosophy far beyond the figure of the human and its rights, far beyond all moralism. And under these conditions, it is indeed barely imaginable that a portion of today's youth should recognize a real philosophical upsurge without all that kept them enthralled to the pure and simple perseverance of what is being unremittingly corrupted. Ever eternally is Socrates judged.